This podcast is part of the Frederick Podcast Network. Learn more at listenfrederick.com.
Discussions in this show should not be construed as specific recommendations or investment advice. Always consult your investment professional before making important investment decisions. Securities offered through Cambridge Investment Research, Inc., a registered broker-dealer member FINRA SIPC. Advisory services through Cambridge Investment Research Advisors, Inc., a registered investment advisor, Hummingbird Wealth Management, LLC, and Cambridge are not affiliated. Now sit back and relax and enjoy another episode of Be the Hummingbird. Here's your host, Laura Johnson.
So welcome to the latest edition of Be the Hummingbird, a podcast where we strive to motivate, inspire, educate, and we do this through stories or guest speakers or sharing of my personal experiences or the people around me. And just pure education, sharing some of the knowledge that I've acquired over the last 30 plus years in the financial services industry. So what are we inspiring and motivating and educating you to do? Well, to be quite honest, is to live the fullest life you possibly can. And by being more educated, you are hopefully inspired to do the things that you've always wanted to do and were afraid to, or motivate you to take care of the things that you need to take care of in your life to live a much more full life and to live the best life you possibly can. So today's topic is about retirement. And retirement, a lot of times people will say, oh, well, I'm 22. What do I really need to think about with retirement? Or shoot, man, I'm 50 and I haven't done anything about retirement, so I'm never going to retire. Or anything in between. And I'm here to educate you a little bit today on what are the different things at different ages you need to think about. And before I proceed with what those things are, I want to share a story with you because, this isn't my podcast if I don't share a little bit of a story. So I worked for a local financial institution, Sandy Spring Bank, down in Montgomery County, Maryland. And I started working there in 1985. I stopped working there in 2012. So you do the math, 27 and a half years of bleeding black and gold for Sandy Spring Bank. They're getting some free advertising here. Great institution. And when I first started working there, I was a teller. By the way, if I ever retire from whatever it is I'm doing at the time, I will gladly go back and be a teller at a bank. And the reason for that is all day I get to count cash. Like cold, hard cash. And I get to talk to people. And when I'm done at the end of the day, I close my cash drawer, I lock it in a vault, and I go home and I don't do any more work until I come back the next day. It sounds like a pretty nice job to me. And I totally enjoyed being a teller. Met some wonderful people at that stage in my life. And one of the great people I met was my branch manager. His name was Kyle Beecraft. He's now a retired mortgage loan officer from Sandy Spring Bank. And he gave me my first raise. And so went into his office and I'm all nervous because I have no idea why I'm going in his office. And he hands me a piece of paper. And before I can take it out of his hand, he grabs it back and starts to educate me on what it is I'm about to get. So the raise I was going to get was $600 a year, which back in 1985 was a lot of money. At 90 some cents a gallon, I was filling a tank of gas a couple of times with that $600. And he started to educate me. He says, what is this going to represent in your paycheck? And so I don't know, I figured it out and my math's going to be all wrong right now, but let's say it was $25 a paycheck. So I said $25 a paycheck. And he goes, well, what is it going to be after taxes? And I said, I don't know. I said, it's probably going to be, $18 a paycheck. And he goes, what are you going to do with that $18 paycheck? And I was like, I don't know. I'm going to go hang out with some friends. I'm going to get some pizza, might be able to buy a new outfit every once in a while and that kind of stuff. And he says, well, tell me, he says, at $18, is that really worth it? He says, if you put that same $18 into your 401k, this is what it's going to do for you. And he talked to me about matching and how, it's deferred and it's reducing my income, therefore reducing my income taxes. And he was my first education at the ripe age of 18 about saving for my future, saving for when I turn an age I'm not even at right now. And so that seemed like a million years ago, by the way. It was. Hopefully Kyle Beecraft will listen to this video. He was definitely an inspiration, along with my mother was an inspiration. And that mantra stuck with me over the years. Every time I got a raise or a gift, I said, okay, is this something that I need? Do I need to add this back into my daily budget or my weekly budget or my monthly budget, or do I want to? And so there was always that need and want, but I would take that money and say, okay, I can afford life right now. So I'm going to put 100% of this raise into my 401k. Or, you know what, prices have increased and I need a little bit of this now, or my lifestyle has changed, so I need a little bit of this right now. But I always paused and said, okay, need versus want. And it got me to the point when I left Sandy Spring, I was maximizing my 401k. And that's amazing. It also helped me, not going to lie, to get through those first couple of years being on my own as an independent financial advisor. Not what it was intended for, but it helped me. It was a great mantra, and it's definitely saved my life. So that's why we're kind of talking about this today. Whether you're in your teens or in your 50s and 60s, there's never a bad time to talk about retirement. Let's talk about the importance of starting early. Obviously, starting early is the best thing. You get to leverage that time and leverage the growth that you have about it. But obviously, I don't know if it's obvious to you, but it's obvious to me. One of the biggest things that I am concerned about for my clients is that we are living longer. We also have to deal with inflation, and job markets are changing as well. So we're constantly looking at the risk of being employed by other people sometimes. So there's a lot of things that can have an impact on that. So we're going to talk today first about people in your 20s. So I just mentioned my story about being 18 years old and starting in your 20s. Starting at 18 years old. But if you're in your 20s, starting to save even small amounts. You could save as little as $5 a paycheck. And what kind of impact that's going to have. Now, I mentioned that I took a $600 raise and I put it all into my 401k. Each year I reevaluated that until I was hitting the maximums, which at the time were in the high teens. Now they're in the low 20s that you can maximize your 401k with. But there's one thing that a lot of people don't remember or think about with their 401ks, if you're fortunate enough to have these, is there's a little concept called free money. So a lot of employers, if you contribute to your retirement plan, will match what you're contributing up to a certain percentage. So the most typical is if you contribute 6%, they're going to match 4%. Well, think about that. You're almost doubling your money just by contributing. And then you have the compound of the growth of the investments that are inside the retirement plan. They're going to help your money grow and grow and grow for the years that you have until retirement. So what does it take in order to jump in and start planning for or saving for your retirement? Well, it takes discipline, to be completely honest with you. Discipline seems to be at the root and core of everything I talk about. But discipline just means that, you know what, I'm going to take a piece of my paycheck and I'm going to hide it from myself and just let it go. Or if you're not working for somebody else, I'm going to take a piece of my revenue and I'm going to hide it from myself and let it grow. In order to do that, you have to have other good financial habits. One of them is having some kind of budget that you're operating from, whether it's a specific detailed Excel spreadsheet budget or a general pencil and paper idea budget. You need to have something. The other thing is make sure that you're managing your debt well. You don't want to be going into debt but saving for retirement at the same time. You want to make sure that you're managing both ends of that. And living below your means, and this is so hard for a lot of people, especially in our 20s. We want. I want the fancy house. I want the new car. I want to be able to buy my children what I never had. But you need to make sure that you're not overspending on those things that are not giving you any long-term returns. They're giving you some short-term happiness, but in the long term, they could be damaging things for you. So you want to make sure that you're focusing on living beneath your means. And what that really means is don't spend more than you're making, and make sure a part of what you're making is being put aside for your future. Whether it's your short-term future or your long-term future, you need to be putting something aside. So that covers you in your 20s. God, that was a long time ago. I don't even want to say how long ago that was. Let's just say that I have kids in their 20s. Anywho, as my dad would say, for those of you in your 30s, in your 30s, you're starting to get like, oh man, I remember my 30th birthday. I wore black or some version of black for the entire month of March because I was so upset. I was in mourning, and everybody's like, seriously? It was actually the hardest birthday I had, was turning 30. I'm like, oh my God, I made it to 30 and everything's downhill from now. I'm going to lose my sight. I'm going to lose my hearing. I'm going to lose my mind. I'm going to lose my body. I'm going to lose everything. Little did I know. Here I sit in my 50s still. Thank you very much. And I'm going, yeah, I wish I was still 30. I wish I knew at 30 what I know in my 50s. Anyway, so one of the things you need to focus on in your 30s, assuming you've done something already, or assuming maybe you haven't, is you want to make sure that you're increasing your contributions. So just like I used in my example of making contributions that were partially my raises that I was getting along the way. At some point in your 30s, you want to try to get to that maximum that you're contributing. Now, if you're not able to do that, do what you can. Doing nothing is not the answer. You want to make sure that you do what you can. You also, just like in your 20s, avoiding debt. If you've gotten into debt, you want to do your best to eliminate some of that high interest debt that you might have, because it's kind of conflicting with that whole saving thing that you're doing. Now, hopefully in your 30s, if you've started investing and you've got your retirement plan, instead of just choosing that one fund, just set it and forget it, you might want to consider some diversification amongst, some mutual funds and some stocks and maybe a little bit of bonds and cash and guaranteed type of investments. And then you want to also start thinking about long-term goals, what your family's going to need, whether or not you own a home at that point, if you want to buy a home, and then potentially be thinking about, I know in my 30s, I knew I was going to be in the financial industry for a very long time, but it wasn't really until my 30s that I was like, I really like this financial planning thing. So you might be thinking about some career changes at the same time. So I've gotten you through your 20s. I have kids there. Gotten you through your 30s. It was a very depressing time. And oh, by the way, I have a kid there. So now we're going to talk about your 40s. Now, my 40s, I'm going to be telling you straight up, I had fun. I was like, man, this isn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. My 30s, I was walking around like, oh my God, I'm going to start falling apart. And I got to my 40s and I was like, okay, this is actually pretty cool. And the 50s were even better. We haven't gotten there yet. So in your 40s, because of what you've done in your 30s, you're hopefully at a point that you're maximizing your contributions to your 401k, which like I said, is in your 20,000 plus or minus range, depending on who you are. If you haven't been able to contribute or get to that point, you want to do what you can to increase what you are contributing, because obviously in your 40s, you're most likely a little closer to retirement than you were in your 20s and 30s. Now, some of us are fortunate enough, like my mom and dad, that they retired at 55. The average person retires 65, 67. Kind of depends on what your lifestyle is, your health is, and all that kind of stuff. You want to be reassessing in your 40s what your investment strategies are, because your ability to take risk in your 40s is a little less than what your ability to take risk is in your 20s. Now, if you relate to the game, you might need to take a little more risk. You might need to have a little more focus on growth than you did because you started late. But in theory, at a 30,000 foot view of the whole audience listening to me right now, in your 40s, you want to reassess your allocations and your investments and reassess what kind of risk you have. And it's at this point, if you have kids, make sure you're planning for their education. Now, I'm going to tell you a little story here. Guess what schools offer? They offer community colleges. They offer work opportunities to be able to pay for your education. They offer scholarships and grants and student loans. Guess what kind of support you get in retirement? Zippo. Zilch. None. I mean, Social Security on some level, I guess some people can look at that as support, but there are no grants, scholarships, or student loans for retirement. So you want to make sure that you're focusing on yourself so you're not a dependent of your child when you get into retirement, which a lot of people are, and that's okay. It's the life you decided to choose, and I guess your kids are okay with that. But I don't know about you, but I have no particular interest to being a burden to my children and having them pay for my life the way I paid for theirs. That's just not the way I look at it. All right, hop into your 50s. This is where I'm at right now. So I mentioned I worked at a bank and I contributed a lot and I saved a lot of money and it helped me to build my business. Unfortunately, I used my entire 401k plan and, not the greatest investment advice I would ever give to anybody is to use your entire 401k plan. But I lost my job and decided to rebuild my company from the ground up. And in order to do that, I need to continue to function on my family level and pay the bills that we had already incurred. I had full faith in myself. And so my retirement plan is just getting restarted in my 50s. And so a lot of those things I told you about your 20s, 30s, and 40s, I did, and they helped me. But now in my 50s, starting all over again. So for me in my 50s, I'm just running. I'm actually just sprinting, trying to catch up to everything that's doing. But that's okay. I look at what I did do and how it saved me and saved my family and allowed me the opportunity to create this business. So I might have to wait till I'm 75 instead of 65 to retire. I'm totally down with that. And if you talk to my clients, they'll tell you I've told them I'm never retiring. I'm not. I'm never retiring unless God has other plans, which he frequently does. So in your 50s, you want to start thinking about, what does retirement look like for you? Now, this is a great question I ask all my clients. When you envision your retirement, what does that look like? And I will tell you, I want to say 9 times out of 10, but it's pretty much 10 times out of 10. They don't have an answer. They haven't allowed themselves the opportunity to dream and really think about it. They might have some random thoughts. Well, I don't know, I might volunteer a little bit more or spend time with my grandkids, but they really haven't developed that vision. And that's something you want to do. You want to start, I call it dreaming. Dream about, what is it that I want for my life other than what I'm doing? So I'm going to come back to me. When I think to myself, what do I want for my life other than what I'm doing? Well, I happen to love what I do. I love helping my clients. I love being able, to get rid of the stuff that's in their way so they can see their future. And why would I give that up? Well, the only reason I give it up is if I couldn't do it anymore, if I mentally just couldn't do it anymore. But in addition to what I love my family. And so for retirement for me is just spending more quality time with my family. And so my family are my 3 boys and my 2 grandchildren right now. They're extended attachments, as well as my husband. And so being able to spend time with them wherever they are. So if they're traveling, I want to travel. If they're home, I want to home. Whatever it is that they're doing, I want to do. The second thing is I want to do a lot of volunteer work. I already do a lot of volunteer work. Second Chances Garage, located here in Frederick County. I do a lot of work for St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, Motocross for Christ, you name it, I'm involved in it. But I want to continue to do those things. So your vision of retirement might be totally different. You're like, nope, I'm done. I'm out of here. I don't want this career anymore. I don't want the 9 to 5. But you might have this hobby, rebuilding cars, racing vehicles, rebuilding homes, gardening, wine tours. That sounds like fun. Those types of things. Envision what that is and who's going to do it with you. And then it makes it easier for you to build upon and have a vision for and know what you need financially to have that future look like. So what else do we need to talk about? You want to, in your 50s, increase any catch-up contributions. Now that you're over the age of 50, both your IRAs, Roth IRAs, 401ks, they have a catch-up provision. So if you've gotten started late in the game, like me, then you can contribute even more than those that are under the age of 50. You want to start researching Social Security. Now, here's the thing. I get all these questions all the time. Will Social Security even exist when I retire? Here's my feeling. Yes. I'm not a professional Social Security analyzer, but I do help guide people on making Social Security decisions. Will it be the same when you file for Social Security as it is for our parents and grandparents? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. But it is a part of the planning process. And so when I work with clients that they're adamant that they're not going to get Social Security, then we'll plan that you're not going to get Social Security and try to build a plan around that. But do I think you're going to get it? Yes. I also get the question of, should I file at 62, wait till I'm 67, wait till I'm 70? And I'm like, well, the answer to that question is pretty much the same answer as it is to any question. It depends. It depends. Are you going to work? Do you have assets and other resources? Does your family's lifespan last beyond 70? So another story, my dad, who's 78, by the way, he'll be 79 this year, came to me when he got his Social Security notice and said, hey, I'm 62. Should I take Social Security? Well, both his parents died at 56. He had a brother die at 40 and another brother die at 66. So I'm looking at my dad at 62 going, yeah. So the likelihood that you're going to make it past 67 is slim to none. So yeah, Dad, please definitely go ahead and apply for Social Security. Well, he's 78. And so he outlived what we thought he was going to live. But in that instance, it was the financial decision versus the emotional decision. We went with the emotional decision. Social Security is its own topic. We need to have its own podcast. So in your 50s, you also want to make sure you're paying off as many of your debts as possible, because that's going to help you in retirement. The less debts you have, the more money you have to spend. I mean, let's be honest, right? You don't have to worry about the mortgage, then that's great. If you don't have to worry about the car payments, that's great. And you can focus your money around the things you want to do in retirement. So now you got into the age of 60. My husband's there, and he tells people all the time, yeah, I'm retired. But he goes to work every day for himself, which is a good thing. So this is the point at which if you have investment assets, that you might want to start having that conversation with your financial advisor about preserving what it is that you've saved. Because the last thing you want to do is grow your assets until you're 60. And then when you retire, the stock market tank and reduce what you have saved by 30, 40, or 50%. I mean, that's a scary, scary place to be in. And so you want to be making sure that if you're managing your own assets, you're paying attention to that diversification and asset allocation that you have, so you don't lose what you've saved. But at the same time, you're only in your 60s. I mean, the likelihood, all of our lifespans are elongated, and so the likelihood that we live into our 70s and 80s and 90s and beyond. I mean, the people living to over age 100 is just amazing at this point. You hear more stories than you ever did when I was a kid. And so, of course, we have social media partially to thank for that, but you want to make sure that, yes, you're preserving it, but at the same time, it's still probably going to need to grow for you to use over the next 40 years. So have some balance. It's at this point in your 60s that you start making some decisions about when you're going to claim Social Security. And like I said, that's a really it depends question and comes with an it depends answer. And then you want to start building a withdrawal strategy. And this is assuming that you are going to actually start withdrawing your money in your 60s. Now, a lot of people say the rule of thumb is 4% withdrawal. I'm going to tell you that's high. When you add in market volatility and life expectancy, 4% withdrawal rate is a fairly high withdrawal rate. It comes with some risk. So the lower you can make that withdrawal rate, and what I mean by that is, say you have $1 million. If you're pulling out $40,000 a year, the likelihood that you are going to run out of money is much higher than if you pull out $20,000 a year. Now, the older you get, your expenses might go up because of your health. But the older you get, your life expectancy has also been shortened at that point. So you can start withdrawing higher rates once you get older. But the younger you are in your 60s, you really want to stick to a lower number. So I've taken you through your 20s, your 30s, your 40s, your 50s, your 60s. Hopefully you're going to retire in your 60s or your 70s, so you don't need a retirement plan strategy. You just live your retirement and have a good time. But there are some key things that you want to keep in mind for retirement planning at any age, whether you're in your 20s or your 80s, your teenagers even could be thinking about these things. One is budgeting. A good budget is a good, solid foundation for success, anything financial. And as I've mentioned in other podcasts, is when you have a good financial grounding, doesn't mean you have to be a millionaire, doesn't mean you have to be making 6 or 7 figures a year, just a good financial grounding in the form of a budget, how much of an impact that has on you physically and emotionally, and allows you to be successful in other areas of your life. Having some kind of emergency fund. If you have debt, then your emergency fund should be around $1,000. So you're focusing all your other money on your debt. But after that, having your emergency fund be 3 to 6 months of your expenses. The other thing a lot of people don't think about is taxes in retirement. And that's something that a financial planner or a CPA can guide you through of what kind of money to be setting aside and possibly paying on a quarterly basis to pay for your taxes. And last but definitely not least is estate planning. Those dreaded things called wills, power of attorneys, and advance directives. The stuff that nobody wants to talk about. Your will, you have one death, one time you're going to die. And that's the time that is very important to have a document, because you want to make sure that your assets are distributed the way they need to be. But your power of attorney and your advance directive, those are things that I'm still alive, and I want to make sure that everything doesn't fall apart while I'm dealing with whatever issue that I'm dealing with. And those documents take care of it. Now, I will tell you that's a podcast for another date. We'll talk about some estate planning documents. So my hope is that this podcast has inspired you, motivated you, and educated you. And I appreciate you for being here. I'm your host, Laura Johnson, and thank you for listening to Be the Hummingbird. This podcast has been presented by Listen Frederick. And as always, it's not goodbye, it's see you later.
Live radio, local podcasts, the Frederick Podcast Network at listenfrederick.com.